back in 2017, a team at Google published a single research paper that didn't just nudge AI forward, it basically gave us a whole new engine to build it. Today, we're diving into that paper. It's called Attention is All You Need, and we're going to see exactly how it lit the fuse for the AI revolution that we are all living through right now.
So to really get why this paper was such a game changer, we gotta start with a really fundamental question. How does a machine even begin to understand a sentence? It's not just about knowing the dictionary definition of words. It's about getting the context, the relationships, the whole vibe of what's being said.
For the longest time, the smartest AI models basically read like we would, just way, way slower. They'd process the first word, then the second, then the third, and so on in a sequence. This method was built on something called a recurrent neural network, or an RNN, and for a while, it was the best we had. But it had a really big, fatal flaw. The problem with this whole one word at a time thing, it was just clumsy. It was slow. And worst of all, it was incredibly forgetful. By the time a model got to the end of a long sentence, it had pretty much forgotten what was said at the beginning. The authors of the paper called this its inherently sequential nature, and it was a massive wall just holding back what AI could really do.
So let's really dig into this. We're calling it the sequential problem. Let's break down exactly why it was such a huge bottleneck for AI development.
I want you to imagine trying to read a complex story, but you can only see it through a tiny little tube that shows you one word at a time. That's pretty much how these old RNN models worked. And the core challenge was obvious, right? How do you connect the ideas? If a character's motive is explained in Chapter 1, the model would probably have forgotten it by the time it got to the climax in Chapter 20. All that critical context was just gone.
And this led to some major, major headaches. First off, because everything had to be done in order, you couldn't use modern parallel computer chips to speed things up. That made training these models take forever. And, as we just talked about, that path from the first word to the last was so long that important information just got lost along the way. This wasn't just a small issue. It was a fundamental cap on how smart these systems could ever get. So it was clear that AI couldn't just get a little bit faster at reading one word at a time. It needed to learn how to read in a completely different way. The solution wasn't going to be a small improvement. It had to be something radical. And here it is. The radical idea was hidden right there in the title of the paper. Instead of all this complex, step-by-step processing, what if a model could just pay attention? What if it could look at an entire sentence all at once and decide for itself which words were most important for understanding the meaning of every other word? This is the magic key, self-attention. It's a mechanism that lets the model see the entire sentence in one go. For any single word, it can attend all the other words and score how relevant they are. This finally gave AI a bird's eye view. It could see the whole forest instead of just one tree at a time. This incredibly powerful idea of self-attention became the engine for a totally new kind of AI architecture. They called it the transformer. So let's pop the hood and see how it works. Okay, I know this looks like a super complicated blueprint, right? But the main idea is actually pretty straightforward. On the left side, you've got the encoder, which reads and understands the input sentence. On the right, you've got the decoder, which generates the output. But here's the revolutionary part. If you look inside those boxes, they completely ripped out the old, slow, sequential parts and replaced them with these new, powerful self-attention layers. So how does this attention thing really work under the hood? Well, the picture on the left shows one basic attention calculation. But the real stroke of genius, what you see on the right, is something they called multi-head attention. They basically asked, why should we only look at the sentence from one point of view? Instead, they decided to run a bunch of these attention calculations all at the same time, in parallel.
The best way to think about it is like assembling a team of experts. One head might be an expert on grammar. Another might focus on who did what to whom. A third might look at the overall tone. The model runs all these experts at the same time, each in their own little subspace, and then brings all their findings together. The result? A much, much richer and more nuanced understanding of the text.
Okay, so the theory sounds amazing. It's parallel, it can see the whole sentence at once. But did it actually work? Well, the answer was a huge, resounding yes. This was the number that made everybody in the AI world stop what they were doing, 28.4. That was the Transformers score on a really important translation quality test called the Blue score. And this wasn't just a little bit better, it smashed the old record. It beat even the most complicated, expensive models out there. This was a massive leap.
But hold on, here's the other half of the story, and it's just as important. It wasn't just better, it was way, way more efficient. The paper showed that the transformer could be trained for just a tiny fraction of the cost of the previous models. This was the holy grail. You get a much higher quality result, and it takes less time and less money to get there. It was a total win-win.
So, when you have something that's not only better, but also way more efficient, well, that doesn't just stay in a lab. That becomes the engine for a revolution. And that's exactly what happened. You can draw a perfectly straight line from this 2017 paper to the AI tools that are literally changing our world as we speak. Google's famous BERT model, built on the Transformers encoder. The GPT series from OpenAI, the technology that powers ChatGPT, yep, that's built on the Transformers decoder. That one paper laid a new foundation, and pretty much everything in generative AI today is built on top of it. When you boil it all down, this whole revolution happened because of one simple, elegant idea. Stop trudging along in a straight line and just learn how to pay attention to what really matters. It forced everyone to rethink how a machine could learn. And it leaves us with a pretty big question, right? If changing the way AI focuses was the key to this leap, what simple, radical idea is going to unlock the next one?